Hi, I'm Tom Lydon, editor of ETF Trends here in Hollywood, Florida at the Inside ETF conference. And I'm here with Kevin Carter, who's the founder of EMQQ, the Emerging Market Internet Index and Fund, right?
Yep.
So tell us about the premise behind it, because it's fascinating. I mean, internet here in the US is huge, but also overseas, it's growing at a huge rate.
It's growing at a huge rate, you're absolutely right. And that's really the story. This is, I believe, the greatest growth story of our lifetime. You have 85% of the world's population just now getting the internet, and they're getting it on a smartphone. So we take for granted here, high-speed cable, desktop computers, but in China, in India, in Africa, these places have never had those luxuries that we take for granted. And so you take this massive wave of emerging market consumers, you give them a cheap smartphone, broadband internet access, and you have basically 40% revenue growth for a sector, which I believe is the greatest growth for a sector that's existed in our lifetime.
So not many have computers or internet at home. Most of it's all on the phone, correct?
It's almost all on the phone.
Yeah.
They're basically leapfrogging our initial computer and internet adoption cycle of the desktop with the cable.
Yeah.
And they're also leapfrogging traditional retail. I mean, we see every quarter when Sears reports, when Walmart reports, traditional retail is being replaced by Amazon.
Yeah.
And in the emerging markets, they don't have a Target store, they don't have a Walmart store, so you give them a smartphone and access to Alibaba, to Mercado Libre, and you have...
They just order it and it shows up.
It shows up, and rather than a brown van or a white van, it's usually a guy on a scooter. But it's a big deal, and it's McKinsey calls the growth of the consumer in emerging markets the greatest growth opportunity in the history of capitalism. And the consumer growth story is growing about 8%, but the e-commerce and internet part of emerging markets is growing at 40%. So if you think back over the last 10 years, and you look at how our internet companies have performed, think of this as sort of the U.S. market 10 years ago for the internet companies. And I think one of the problems is in the United States, while we are all living the internet and it's changing our lives and we're doing everything on our smartphone and not going to Target and buying things on Amazon Prime, the black eye that the internet took in the '99 bubble sort of scarred people. But if you look back after that, what's happened with the internet companies here in the United States, and again, every quarter all you have to do is watch CNBC and you'll see Amazon's booming, Facebook's booming, Netflix is booming, traditional consumption is declining.
Yeah, amazing. Give me one company that you're most excited about when you look at the index that the average person wouldn't know.
Well, I guess I would say Didi. And this is not a publicly traded company yet. Didi is the Uber of China. And Didi, however, is partially owned by Alibaba and partially owned by Tencent. And what happened was each of those companies had backed a Chinese taxi hailing company, Didi Quadai, or Didi Dash and Quadi Dash. When they learned that the US Uber was coming to China, they merged. So the two biggest Chinese internet companies partnered to create basically 100% market share in China. Uber came to China, the US-based Uber, and spent a lot of money and failed.
Right.
And just last year, first Apple invested $1 billion in Didi, and then Uber gave up. And Uber then gave their business to Didi in exchange for equity. And so Didi is one of probably 200 private companies that are inside of EMQQ by virtue of investments by the publicly traded companies. And ironically, a week after Uber gave up and gave Didi their equity or their business, Didi turned around and invested in Ola Cab, which is the Indian version of Didi.
Wow.
So the private companies everyone knows Alibaba and Baidu, but it's the private companies, it's the Konga.com, which is the Nigerian version of Amazon, it's the Flipkart, which is the Indian version of Amazon. Those companies are already in EMQQ by virtue of large investments from the public companies.
Great. Kevin, awesome stuff. Thanks so much.
Thanks, good to see you.